Nothing travels faster than gossip. That's how my story begins, born from a rumor. One of those fleeting remarks you overhear, the kind that clings to your thoughts even though you wish it wouldn't. It started 2 weeks ago when I bumped into Ryan, an old acquaintance, at the gym. We weren't particularly close, but we always got along well enough. After the usual banter about workout routines and the universal hatred of early mornings, his demeanor shifted. His voice lowered, almost conspiratorial. "Hey, Matt, you know Carrington? Madison's boss?" he asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. I frowned slightly, curious. "Yeah, why?" Ryan hesitated, his expression guarded. "He's got a reputation, especially with married women. Just, keep an eye out." That was all he said. Nothing more. At the time, I laughed it off, dismissing it as idle talk. But as I drove home, his words replayed in my head, looping endlessly. Keep an eye out. Ryan wasn't the type to gossip, and the way he delivered that warning, it was subtle, cautious, but deliberate, stuck with me. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Little things. Madison's late nights at work. Her phone now locked more often than not. The sudden intensity with which she approached her presentations. Then there were the moments I couldn't ignore. Her secretive smiles while looking at her phone, quickly putting it away whenever I entered the room. And the perfume. Madison usually wore something light and floral, understated. But lately, there was a new scent, bold and intoxicating, the kind of fragrance that feels provocative, dangerous. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off with a shrug. "A coworker gave it to me," she said casually, holding the bottle up. "It's a gift. You don't like it." I didn't answer. It wasn't about liking it or not. It was about the way her explanation felt too easy, too rehearsed. Beneath the surface, I sensed something shifting, something I didn't want to acknowledge. Then came the party, Carrington's infamous annual company bash. Madison had talked about it for days, hyping it up like it was the Oscars. "It's huge," she kept saying, her voice full of excitement. "Everyone's going to be there, Matt. It'll be amazing." But her enthusiasm wasn't genuine. There was a hunger in her eyes, a nervous energy. When I finally agreed to go, her reaction wasn't joy. It was surprise, almost as if she hadn't expected me to say yes. That evening, Madison got ready as though preparing for a battle. She spent hours in the bathroom, emerging in a crimson dress I'd never seen before. The dress was striking, daring, almost too daring, the kind of thing a woman wears to command attention. "You look incredible," I told her honestly. She didn't respond, just smirked and gave herself one last glance in the mirror before grabbing her purse. The party was hosted at Carrington's estate, a sprawling mansion that reeked of excess. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceilings, and there were more wine bottles than people. As we walked in, Madison clung to my arm, her grip tight. At the time, I thought it was affection. Now I know better, it was guilt. She vanished almost immediately, moving through the crowd with practiced ease, flashing smiles and charming her way from one group to another like a seasoned politician. Every time our eyes met, she gave me a quick, forced smile that felt more like a performance than anything real. I stayed in the background, quietly observing, trying to piece together the growing unease in my chest. That's when Carrington appeared beside me, a glass of whiskey in hand, his presence exuding confidence. "Matt, right?" he said, offering his hand with a polished smile. "Madison's husband." The way he said it, it wasn't a compliment. "Yeah, that's me," I replied coolly, shaking his hand even though my instincts screamed at me not to. "Lucky man," he added, his tone dripping with insincerity. "Madison's a real asset to the company. One of the sharpest we've got." I forced a polite smile. "Yeah, she works hard." He didn't respond, just took a slow sip of his drink and glanced across the room. Following his gaze, I saw her. Madison stood at the far end of the hall, laughing a little too brightly at something some executive had said. Her body language told a story I didn't want to hear. Too at ease, too comfortable. Something shifted inside me, a nagging feeling that wouldn't go away. As the night wore on, Madison became increasingly distant. Every time I tried to approach her, she brushed me off like I was an inconvenience. "I'm networking," she hissed through clenched teeth at one point. "Stop hovering, Matt. Go enjoy yourself." Enjoy myself? How was I supposed to enjoy anything when I felt like a punchline in a cruel joke? A room full of strangers silently mocking me. And then it happened, the moment that changed everything, the one I can't erase from my memory no matter how hard I try. I'd excused myself to the restroom, desperate to clear my head and steady my nerves. On the way back, I passed a small side hallway. At the end was a heavy oak door, slightly ajar. From the room beyond, I heard laughter, her laughter. Madison's laugh, once a sound I cherished, now made my stomach turn. It was unmistakable, but this time it felt different. Felt wrong. Something urged me forward, whether instinct or madness, I don't know. My pulse thundered in my ears as I approached the door, the gap wide enough to offer a sliver of the scene inside. What I saw stole the air from my lungs. There was Carrington, standing far too close to Madison. His hand rested lightly on her waist, and she leaned into him, smiling as though he were the center of her world. He murmured something in her ear, making her laugh softly. Then she placed her hand on his chest, her fingers lingering as if drawn there. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But then Carrington leaned in further, his lips brushing against her cheek before moving in for a kiss. And she didn't pull away. She didn't freeze. She kissed him back. I stumbled a step backward, my chest tightening as if someone had driven a blade through it. My hands trembled, and my face burned with a chaotic mix of humiliation, fury, and disbelief. I couldn't comprehend it. The woman I loved, the one I trusted completely, was standing there, letting another man hold her like I didn't exist. For a brief, searing moment, I was ready to burst through the door, to grab Carrington by the collar and rip him away from her in front of everyone. But before I could act, Madison broke the kiss, pulling back slightly. And then she said it, the words I'll never forget. "You're the cuckold worth searching for." I froze where I stood, my blood turning ice cold, my vision blurred, my ears filled with an unbearable ringing. The meaning of her words was a mystery, but the intent behind them was clear, to humiliate me, to cut me down to nothing. It wasn't just betrayal, it was mockery, calculated and cruel. I turned and walked out of the house without looking back, my hands shaking so hard I wasn't sure I could hold my keys. One thought echoed in my mind, sharper than any knife. She thinks I'm weak. She thinks this is a joke. She was wrong. Dead wrong. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, but my mind wasn't on the road. It was trapped in a relentless loop of what I'd seen, what I'd heard. Madison's voice rang in my head, taunting me. "You're the cuckold worth searching for." What did she mean by it? Was it some kind of twisted inside joke between her and Carrington? Or worse, was it her way of ridiculing me, knowing I'd catch her, knowing it would destroy me? When I pulled into the driveway, I didn't move for a long time. The faint glow of streetlights reflected off the hood of the car, and the engine hummed softly, a sound that should have been soothing but felt hollow. I stared into the darkness, trying to make sense of it all, but there was nothing left to understand. Just an empty ache and a rising storm of anger. Eventually, I shut off the engine and went inside. The house was silent, eerily still. I dropped onto the couch, leaning forward with my hands on my knees, feeling like a man who'd been gutted but somehow kept walking. There was nothing left of the person I'd been just hours ago. I was hollow yet burning from the inside out, and I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. I had no idea how long I'd been sitting there, staring blankly into the dark. When the front door creaked open around 2 a.m., the sharp click of Madison's heels on the tile snapped me out of my daze. At first, she didn't notice me sitting in the shadowed corner of the living room. She hummed softly, tossing her purse onto the counter and slipping off her shoes like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just shattered my trust. Then her eyes caught mine in the dim light. For the briefest moment, I saw her falter, a flicker of surprise flashing across her face. But she quickly masked it, her expression smoothing into practiced indifference. "Oh, you're still up?" she said casually, as though nothing was out of the ordinary. Her voice was light, almost breezy, as if the evening had been nothing more than a pleasant social event. I didn't reply right away. I just sat there, my gaze fixed on her, cold and steady. The silence stretched between us, and I saw her start to fidget. "You okay, Matt?" she asked, shifting her weight awkwardly. "Did you have fun tonight? Did you have fun tonight?" I finally said, my tone calm but tight, like a taut rope on the verge of snapping. She hesitated for just a moment. "Yeah," she said carefully. "It was a good night. A lot of important people were there." "Important people like Carrington?" I asked sharply, my words slicing through the pretense. Her expression flickered just for a split second, but I caught it. She recovered quickly, folding her arms across her chest and sighing dramatically, like I was the one making this difficult. "Are we really doing this?" she said, exasperated. "Starting fights because I talked to my boss? Jesus, Matt. You know I have to be nice to him. It's part of my job." "Nice," I said softly, my voice laced with quiet fury. "You were a little more than nice." Her posture stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" I stood, my movements deliberate, and closed the distance between us until I was just a few feet away. Close enough to see the faint smudge of lipstick clinging to the edge of her mouth. Lipstick that wasn't mine. "I saw you, Madison," I said quietly, my voice low and controlled. "In the study. With him." Her face turned pale, but she didn't stammer or retreat. Instead, she tilted her head and straightened her back, a defiance creeping into her expression. She looked at me like a queen being accused of treason by a peasant. "And?" she said flatly, a challenge hidden in the single word. Her tone made my blood boil. It wasn't remorseful or defensive. It was dismissive, indifferent, as though what I'd seen was beneath acknowledgement. "And?" I repeated, my voice tinged with disbelief. "You're not even going to deny it?" She rolled her eyes. "Deny what?" "That I kissed him." Her lips curled into a sardonic smirk. "Fine. I kissed him. So what? It's not like I slept with him." Her words hit me like a slap. "So now it's just a kiss?" I said, my voice rising. "That's where we're drawing the line? You're sneaking off with your boss, kissing him behind closed doors, and I'm supposed to shrug it off because it didn't go further? Do you even hear yourself, Madison?" She shrugged, her face a mask of cool indifference. "You're overreacting. It was stupid. I'd had too much to drink. And he was charming, okay? It didn't mean anything." "You kissed him?" I said through clenched teeth, my anger simmering just below the surface. "And then you said that to him." Her brow furrowed, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "Said what?" I stared at her, my voice dropping. "You called me a cuckold. Worth searching for. Whatever the hell that's supposed to mean." This time her composure cracked. Her face froze, her eyes widening ever so slightly. For the first time all night, she looked shaken. She didn't say anything. She didn't move. "Where did that come from, Madison?" I pressed, stepping closer. "Is that something you came up with? Or did Carrington put that idea in your head?" "Stop!" she snapped suddenly, her voice slicing through the heavy silence like a blade. "You're acting insane. Twisting this into something it's not. I told you it was nothing. You need to let it go." I let out a bitter laugh, one that sounded foreign even to me. "Let it go? You humiliated me tonight, Madison. And now you're standing here, telling me to just let it go." She squared her shoulders, her eyes narrowing. "I'm not going to stand here and be interrogated." She spun toward the hallway with a sharpness that cut through the room. "This conversation is over. I'm exhausted, and you're being overly dramatic," she declared, her voice dripping with finality. Without another word, she turned and strode away. I stood frozen, watching her retreat into the bedroom, her back vanishing into the shadows of the hallway. Something deep inside me shifted then, something fundamental. It wasn't just a crack in my composure. It felt like the last fragile piece holding me together shattered into dust. This wasn't a case of poor judgment or some harmless misunderstanding. No, Madison had been fully aware of what she was doing. And worse, she didn't care. I lingered there in the dimly lit living room, standing in the oppressive silence. The faint rustle of her movements in the bedroom reached me, but it only fed the storm inside my head. My thoughts raced, leaping from one revelation to the next, connecting threads I hadn't noticed before. How long had this been happening? What other betrayals had she swept under the rug without me noticing? Sleep was a distant hope that night. I stayed planted on the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling as a single, relentless thought took root and solidified. If Madison thought she could treat me like this, mock me, dismiss me, and walk away unscathed, she was dead wrong. I wasn't going to let it slide this time. I was done being the nice guy she could trample over. The morning arrived in a cold, oppressive silence. I woke up stiff and sore from the couch, the acrid taste of last night's bitterness still lingering in my mouth like ash. Madison was already up, perched at the kitchen island in her silk robe, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. She looked so composed, so unbothered, that it made my stomach churn. I stood there for a moment, just watching her. There was something smug about her posture, an air of self-satisfaction that made my blood simmer. Was she proud of herself? Was she reveling in this? "Good morning," she said casually, not even bothering to glance up from her screen. Her tone was almost cheerful, like she was trying to rub salt in the wound. I didn't reply. Instead, I grabbed a mug and poured myself some coffee, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. I had no intention of speaking first, but of course, Madison couldn't resist. "You're still sulking?" she asked lightly, though there was an unmistakable edge to her words. "Come on, Matt. This doesn't have to be such a big deal." The coffee pot hit the counter with a loud, sharp clang as I slammed it down, the noise reverberating through the kitchen like a warning shot. Madison finally looked up, startled, her expression fleetingly betraying surprise before shifting back to annoyance. "A big deal," I said, my voice cold and steady, though anger simmered beneath the surface. "You kissed your boss, Madison. Then you called me a cuckold. Do you even hear yourself?" She rolled her eyes with a practiced nonchalance, a move so dismissive it felt like a slap. "I've already explained. It was a stupid joke. A slip-up. I don't even know what you think you heard." "Oh, I know exactly what I heard," I shot back, my voice rising slightly. "You looked him in the eye and said it. What kind of joke is that, Madison?" With an exaggerated sigh, she set her phone down as though this argument was just another chore for her. "Oh my God, Matt. You're being so insecure right now. Not everything's about you, you know. Newsflash, it isn't always about you." Her arrogance hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't apologetic or embarrassed. No, she was speaking to me as though I were the unreasonable one, like I was beneath her. "You're lying to me?" I said flatly, the accusation hanging heavy in the air. "And you don't even care that I know it." Madison stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor with a harsh screech. "I'm done with this conversation," she snapped. "No," I said firmly, stepping into her path as she tried to leave the kitchen. "You don't get to walk away again. Not this time. If you're going to disrespect me, at least have the courage to admit it." Her eyes darkened, a cold calculation flickering behind them. "Get out of my way, Matt," she warned, her tone low and dangerous. "And if I don't?" I challenged, refusing to back down. She stared at me with icy disdain, her silence more cutting than any words she could have spoken. The message in her glare was clear. "You're nothing to me." Without another word, she shoved past me, her shoulder knocking into mine with deliberate force. Moments later, I heard the shower turn on, the sound of running water filling the house as I stood there, rooted to the spot. Consumed by the storm raging inside me, I slumped into a chair, my hands gripping the empty coffee cup as though it could anchor me to reality. My heart raced, but my thoughts had never been clearer. Madison had crossed a boundary, one that she didn't even bother pretending to respect. This wasn't just about the kiss anymore. It was about her. The way she looked at me with disdain, as if she'd already decided I wasn't worth her time or effort. And in that moment, a painful truth crystallized in my mind. I didn't know this woman anymore. The person I married, the one I once believed I'd grow old with, was gone. In her place was someone who seemed to hold me in contempt. Someone who didn't respect me. Someone who didn't love me. Or maybe she never had. Maybe the warning signs had been there from the beginning, and I'd been too naive or too hopeful to see them. I couldn't stay in that house another minute. Rising abruptly, I grabbed my keys and walked out, my movements fueled by a restless, burning energy. I drove aimlessly, mile after mile, the storm in my mind refusing to settle. Work wasn't an option. I couldn't show up like this, not when I was coming apart at the seams. Then Ryan's voice echoed in my mind. His warning from the gym. Keep your eyes open, man. I pulled over outside a small diner and took out my phone. My hands hovered over the screen, hesitating, before I finally typed out a message. Hey Ryan, you busy? His reply came almost instantly. Nah, what's up? Can we meet? I need to talk to you. It's about Madison. A couple of hours later, we were sitting in a booth at the back of the diner. Ryan nursed a Coke, his eyes scanning my face with concern. You look like hell, he said. I feel worse, I admitted, my gaze fixed on the coffee in front of me. So what happened? He asked, leaning in. I didn't hold back. I told him everything, the party, what I saw, and what Madison said. As the story unfolded, his expression grew darker, his jaw tightening. By the time I finished, he leaned back, exhaling sharply. Damn, he muttered. I was hoping I was wrong. What do you mean? I asked, my tone sharp, my fists clenching beneath the table. He hesitated, weighing his words carefully. Look, Matt, Carrington's got a reputation. He's been pulling this crap for years. He's a snake, always targeting women in the office. Some fall for it, some don't. And Madison? I pressed, the tension in my voice rising. What about her? Ryan sighed heavily. She's been spending a lot of time with him lately. Business trips, late-night meetings. People at work have noticed. I didn't want to say anything because, well, I didn't want to make things worse if I was wrong. But after what you just told me, the room felt like it was shrinking, the walls pressing in as his words settled over me. My hands tightened into fists. She's been lying to me? I said quietly, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. Ryan nodded grimly. I'm sorry, man. I really am. But you needed to know. I stared out the window, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. Madison had made a fool out of me, and Carrington had been there with her every step of the way. The anger bubbling inside me began to boil over, but it wasn't wild or reckless. No, it was something colder, sharper, a calculated resolve. You okay? Ryan asked cautiously, his tone wary. Yeah, I said, my voice calm. Too calm. I'm good. Thanks for telling me. The drive home was quiet, but my mind was anything but. As I gripped the steering wheel, a plan began to form. A clear, focused strategy. I wasn't going to confront Madison again. Not yet. She thought I was weak, that I wouldn't fight back. But she was wrong. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't plead. No, I'd make her pay. And when I was finished, she'd never see it coming. When I walked through the door that evening, the house was still and silent, a vacuum of sound that felt suffocating. Madison was on the couch, her laptop open as she typed away on something for work. She didn't even bother to glance up when I entered. It was as though I wasn't even there. She barely glanced at me, the kind of fleeting, impersonal look you'd give a stranger waiting behind you in line at the grocery store. Detached, uninterested. Where have you been? She asked, her tone flat, not out of concern but pure curiosity, as if she were just checking a box. Out? I replied shortly, kicking off my shoes. She made a vague humming sound in response and went back to typing, completely absorbed in her laptop. It was as though the previous night had evaporated from her memory, as though I hadn't caught her pressed against her boss in the shadows, whispering words that still felt carved into my skin. Every instinct I had screamed at me to grab her, pull her off that couch and force her to face the truth, to demand an explanation. to shout until she couldn't deny it any longer. But I didn't. Instead, I did the one thing she would never have anticipated. I smiled. "Want dinner?" I asked, my voice light, almost cheerful. She finally looked up, her expression a mix of confusion and suspicion. "What?" "I'm cooking dinner," I said, my tone casual, like nothing was wrong. "Steak and potatoes. You want some?" She blinked, clearly struggling to process my words. It was as though I'd spoken to her in a foreign language. "Yeah, sure," she finally said, her hesitation barely masked. And with that, the first act of my plan began. Over the next few days, I transformed into the image of the perfect husband. I greeted her with warm smiles. I brought her coffee in the mornings just the way she liked it, 2 sugars, a splash of cream. I kissed her cheek before she left for work, holding the kiss just long enough to make her uneasy. Madison didn't know how to react. I could see it in her eyes, the uncertainty, the way she studied me like I was some unpredictable animal. She had been expecting anger, an explosion of rage, maybe even tears. What she got instead was calm, a calm so unnerving it threw her off balance. By Wednesday, the tension finally got to her. She cracked over dinner. "Are we not going to talk about it?" she blurted out, her fork paused halfway to her mouth. I looked up slowly, feigning confusion. "Talk about what?" She narrowed her eyes, suspicion flickering across her face. "The party. You've been acting weird since then." I gave her a slow, deliberate smile. "Weird? I feel fine," I said smoothly. "Honestly, I've just been thinking about how lucky I am." "Lucky?" she repeated, the word dripping with skepticism, as if it tasted bitter in her mouth. "To have you," I said, leaning back in my chair. I kept my tone measured, even warm. "I mean, sure, people make mistakes. Everyone slips up. But we're stronger than that, aren't we, Madison?" Her hand froze midair, her fork suspended, and her face shifted, guarded now, wary. "Of course," she muttered, her voice low. She quickly looked back down at her plate, but it was too late. I saw it, the first crack in her armor. For the next week, I played the role flawlessly. Outwardly, I was the devoted, unbothered husband. But behind the scenes, I worked methodically, gathering every piece of information I could. During the day, I went to work as usual. At night, when Madison thought I had fallen asleep on the couch, I began digging. Her laptop was the first target. Her passwords were laughably easy, our wedding date, the name of her favorite author. I sifted through emails, messages, calendar invites. At first, it was all routine, nothing incriminating. But then I found it. An email chain between Madison and Carrington. The words weren't dripping with romance. There were no overt confessions of love, no signatures. But it didn't need to be explicit. The language was coded, yet clear enough. Carrington. Looking forward to our meeting Friday night. I'll bring the wine. You bring yourself. Madison, you're impossible. But yes, I'll be there. The email was dated the week before the party. This wasn't a one-off mistake. It wasn't just a drunken kiss. Madison had been seeing him, sneaking around behind my back with a man who had likely perfected this routine with countless women. I closed the laptop softly and sat in the dark, a cold, razor-sharp clarity settling over me like a blade. This wasn't just betrayal. It was an insult. Madison hadn't just disrespected me. She had underestimated me. By the time Friday arrived, I was ready. Madison had plans, and I knew exactly what she was up to. She didn't even try to hide it. That morning, as she stood in front of the mirror fixing her hair, she spoke with an almost practiced casualness. "I'll be working late," she said, tucking a loose strand behind her ear. "Big presentation coming up. Don't wait up." Her tone was breezy, but I caught the faint flicker of guilt in her reflection. She knew she was lying, and for a brief second, I wondered if she enjoyed it, if the thrill of deception was part of what made it all so enticing. "That's fine," I replied evenly, sliding my hands into my pockets. "I've got things to keep me busy." She glanced at me, her suspicion flaring briefly. "What kind of things?" "Just errands." I gave her an easy smile. "You know me, always productive. She didn't push further. Instead, she grabbed her bag, leaned in to give me a quick, hollow kiss on the cheek, and walked out the door as though everything was perfectly normal. The second she was gone, I moved. Grabbing my keys, I drove straight to Ryan's office downtown. He was waiting for me in the lobby, his unease written all over his face. "You sure you want to go through with this?" he asked the moment I approached. "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. Ryan exhaled heavily, his reluctance clear. "All right, I've got a guy. Private investigator. He's discreet and damn good at what he does." He handed me a small card with a name and number printed neatly on it. I stared at it, the weight of the decision pressing down on me like a lead blanket. "Thanks, Ryan," I said quietly. "Just don't do anything stupid, okay?" he warned, his voice low and earnest. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned on my heel, dialing the number as I walked out of the building. That evening, Madison sent me a text around 8:30 p.m. working late. "I'll probably stay at a hotel near the office. Don't worry about me." The audacity was staggering. I stared at the screen, my lips curling into a humorless smirk. "No problem. Be safe," I typed back, my fingers steady. Then I powered off my phone and waited. It didn't take long. By 10 p.m., the investigator had delivered exactly what I needed. Photos landed in my inbox, sharp, damning evidence of her betrayal. Madison and Carrington, arm in arm, stepping into a luxury hotel downtown. They were smiling, laughing, as if they didn't have a care in the world. She was wearing the crimson dress from the party, its fabric clinging to her figure like a cruel reminder of that night. I sat in the dark living room, the cold glow of the screen illuminating my face as I examined each photo. Carrington's hand rested possessively on her waist, while Madison gazed up at him with adoration, as though he were the center of her universe. I felt nothing, no shock, no heartbreak, only cold, ruthless determination. The game was on now. Madison had handed me everything I needed, oblivious to the trap she was walking into. She thought she had me cornered, that I'd just accept my role as the passive, clueless husband. But that version of me was gone. The man she thought she knew didn't exist anymore. By Saturday morning, I was ready. I had the evidence, the timing, and an unshakable resolve. Madison hadn't come home the night before. Around 11 p.m., she'd sent a lazy text. Late meeting turned into dinner. Staying at the hotel. "I'll see you tomorrow. Love you. Love you." Two hollow words tacked on like a weak patch over a crumbling facade. I didn't bother replying. There was no need. I sat at the dining table with a steaming cup of coffee, my thoughts sharper than ever. Madison thought she had me wrapped around her finger, convinced I'd play the part of the blind, obedient husband, quietly enduring her lies while she desecrated everything we'd built. But she was wrong. The truth was simple. Madison wasn't even in the game anymore. I was already in control. The first step of my plan relied on the one person Madison had gravely underestimated: me. I spent the morning with Jessica McAllister, a divorce attorney with a reputation for being sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous in court. She came highly recommended by Ryan, and within minutes of meeting her, I understood why. Jessica had a calm, professional demeanor, but there was a fire in her eyes, a calculated intensity that told me she wasn't just here to help. She was here to win. "So, what's your situation?" she asked, leaning forward slightly, her hands folded on the polished surface of her desk. Without a word, I slid a folder across to her. Inside were the photos, receipts, and emails I'd gathered. "My wife is having an affair," I said simply. "And I've got proof." Jessica opened the folder and began flipping through the contents. Her face remained calm and composed, but I caught the glint in her eyes as she took in the evidence. "This is solid. Very solid," she said, nodding slightly. "Are you documenting all of this?" "Yes," I replied. "I've started collecting everything: bank statements, phone records, hotel receipts. I want her cornered." Jessica gave a small, approving smile. "You're being smart. Do you and your wife share any joint assets?" I thought about the house, the savings account, the car. Yes, but I don't care about the money, I said firmly. I just want the truth out. I want her to know she didn't win. Her faint smile widened slightly. You'd be surprised how often I hear that, she said. Don't worry, Mr. Anderson. By the time I'm done, she won't see it coming. I shook her hand, my grip firm and steady. Let's get started. The second phase of my plan required precise timing. Madison's entire life, her carefully maintained image, hinged on one fragile foundation: secrecy. She believed no one knew. Not her friends, not her colleagues, and certainly not me. But what would happen if that secrecy vanished? By late afternoon, I was staring at a group chat on my phone. I had assembled an audience: Madison's closest friends, several colleagues, and, of course, Ryan. I composed the message carefully, my thumbs moving deliberately over the keyboard. Hi everyone. I'm reaching out because there's something you should know. Madison and her boss, Mark Carrington, have been having an affair behind my back. I've tried addressing this privately, but she refuses to admit the truth. I'm sharing this because I believe people deserve to know who they're dealing with. Attached were the photos from the private investigator. Madison and Carrington entering the hotel, arm in arm, their expressions brimming with smug satisfaction. She looked at him the way she used to look at me, and that detail stung even more than I expected. I hovered over the send button, my thumb poised in hesitation. Not from doubt, but from anticipation. Madison had been playing her game for months. Now, it was time for her to see how it felt to be on the other side. I pressed send. There was no going back now. That evening, Madison strolled into the house just after 7 p.m., wearing the same crimson dress she'd worn to Carrington's party. She was immaculate, every detail of her appearance polished and flawless, as though she'd stepped out of a glossy magazine. Her makeup was still perfect, her smile as easy and confident as ever. "Hey!" she chirped, tossing her keys onto the counter with practiced nonchalance. "Long day." She leaned in and kissed me on the cheek, the sheer audacity of the gesture making my jaw tighten. Then, as if nothing was amiss, she headed straight for the kitchen. "I'm starving. Want me to order something? Chinese?" I didn't respond. I sat on the couch, my phone in hand, waiting, watching. She must have noticed the silence, because after a moment, she turned to look at me. "Matt." I raised my eyes slowly, meeting hers with a calm intensity. Her perfect smile faltered, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. I saw it, the flicker of confusion, the faint ripple of unease crossing her face. "You okay?" she asked, her voice softer now, tinged with uncertainty. My phone buzzed in my hand, then again, and again, each vibration slicing through the tense silence. A symphony of notifications filled the room as Madison's phone, still in her purse, joined the chorus. Buzz after buzz, ding after ding, the sound was relentless. Her movements faltered, her face freezing mid-expression. "What's that?" she muttered, pulling her phone out. I watched her as it happened, the transformation of her expression in real time. Confusion turned to disbelief, then to outright panic. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through her messages, the color draining from her face. What is this?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I stood slowly, my steps deliberate as I walked toward her. "Something wrong, Madison?" She turned to me, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. "What did you do?" I shrugged, maintaining a calm, detached demeanor. "I let people know the truth. Isn't that what you're always preaching? That honesty matters." Her voice cracked as the reality hit her. You sent this to everyone?" "Not everyone," I corrected smoothly. "Just the people who matter to you, your friends, your coworkers. I figured they deserved to know exactly who you are." Her breathing grew ragged, panic etched across her features as she clutched her phone tighter, scrolling through the endless stream of messages. "You've ruined me," she whispered, her voice trembling. I stepped closer, my presence towering over her as she sank into one of the dining chairs, still gripping her phone like a lifeline. "No, Madison," I said, my voice low and cutting. "You ruined yourself. All I did was turn on the lights so everyone else could see it. Her composure shattered as she buried her face in her hands. Why would you do this? Why couldn't you just let it go? I leaned down until we were at eye level, my voice as cold as ice. Because you thought I was weak. You thought you could humiliate me and walk away unscathed. But now you know the truth. I'm not the man you thought I was. Her phone buzzed again, and I saw the screen light up with more messages. Some were shocked, others were judgmental, each one chipping away at the carefully constructed facade she'd worked so hard to maintain. You'll regret this, she hissed suddenly, her mascara-streaked face lifting to meet my gaze. Tears streamed down her cheeks as anger and desperation collided in her eyes. I smiled, a slow, deliberate grin that I knew would unnerve her further. No, Madison, I said. You're the one who's going to regret this. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her there, small, broken, and alone. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of freedom, a clarity that had been absent for far too long. This wasn't over. Not yet. But Madison had just learned the first rule of betrayal. Never underestimate the man you think you've broken. The next morning, Madison's perfectly curated world was in ruins. I woke early, refreshed for the first time in months. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the central air. Madison's side of the bed was untouched. She hadn't come upstairs the night before. Not that it mattered. I made my way downstairs and found her curled up on the couch, a hollow shell of the woman she used to be. Her makeup was smeared across her tear-streaked face, and her phone sat on the coffee table next to her, its screen still lighting up with a relentless barrage of notifications. I watched her for a moment, arms wrapped tightly around herself as though she were trying to disappear. She didn't notice me until I spoke. Rough night. Her head snapped up, and her bloodshot eyes locked onto mine. She looked like a fragile mix of rage and despair, her voice raw when she spoke. What the hell did you do, Matt? I leaned casually against the doorframe, crossing my arms. You mean what you did? I just let people know. She shot up from the couch, her movements frantic and charged with anger. You think this is funny? You think you're going to come out of this looking good? Everyone is talking about me, Matt. Everyone. My friends, my coworkers. She spat, her voice shaking with anger and despair. Do you know how many calls I've gotten from the office? People are laughing at me. Good, I said, my tone steady and unyielding. She flinched as though I'd slapped her, her lips trembling. You don't even care what you've done to our lives. Your life too. You look insane. I let a faint smile play at the corners of my mouth. Insane? No, Madison. I look like a man who finally decided to stand up for himself. There's a difference. You ruined me, she screamed, her voice breaking under the weight of her emotions. I didn't flinch. No, Madison, you ruined yourself. The moment you decided that lying, sneaking around, and humiliating me was worth it, you made this choice. I just made sure you had to live with the consequences. She collapsed back onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. For a long moment, the room was silent except for her ragged breathing. When she finally looked up, the fury in her eyes had been replaced by something colder, calculating. This isn't over, she said in a low, venomous tone. I'll tell everyone you're crazy, that you made all of this up. I raised an eyebrow and pulled my phone from my pocket. You think anyone's going to believe that? I've got the emails, the photos, the receipts. Spin your stories all you want, Madison. But the truth is already out. Her face paled. She opened her mouth to speak, but I continued, my voice dark and biting. And Carrington? He's not coming to save you. Men like him cut their losses the second things get messy. He'll let you burn to protect himself. I saw the realization land, the weight of her crumbling world reflected in her wide, panicked eyes. By lunchtime, the fallout was already rippling outward. Madison locked herself in the bedroom, but through the door, I could hear snippets of her frantic phone calls. She was scrambling, clinging to the threads of her shattered reputation. Her voice cracked as she begged someone, probably Carrington, on the other end of the line. Mark, you need to fix this. No, you don't understand. This is my career. I can't lose this job, Mark. Do something. I almost laughed. Trouble in paradise. The first texts from Madison's friends began to roll in shortly after. I let the calls go to voicemail but couldn't resist reading the messages. Andrea. Matt. Is this true? Madison? I don't even know what to say. Ryan, dude. Is blowing up at her office. Carrington got called into HR this morning. They're investigating him. Investigating him. Good. It meant Carrington's golden boy image was finally starting to crack. Madison had hitched herself to a man whose reputation couldn't survive the faintest breeze, let alone the storm I'd unleashed. I spent the afternoon in quiet satisfaction, watching as the fire I'd ignited continued to spread. Madison could fight, claw, and beg all she wanted to hold on to her world, but the truth had a way of consuming everything in its path, and I was the one who had lit the match. By evening, the bedroom door creaked open. Madison stepped out, her face drained of color. She moved stiffly, her confident mask gone, replaced by sweatpants and a hoodie, a far cry from the polished image she'd always tried to maintain. "Can we talk?" she muttered, her voice barely audible. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She hesitated, then shuffled over to the dining table, sitting down across from me. Her hands fidgeted nervously, folded together like a child waiting for a lecture. "Matt," she began, her voice hoarse and raw. "I messed up. I know I messed up. Okay? But this, everything you've done, it's gone too far." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Define too far, Madison. Was it when you kissed your boss? Or when you decided I was a clueless golden retriever who wouldn't figure it out?" She winced, my words hitting their mark. "I was stupid," she said, her voice cracking. "I wasn't thinking. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated slowly, the disbelief in my voice palpable. "So you threw away our marriage, humiliated me in front of everyone we know, and it didn't mean anything? That's your excuse?" Her eyes darted away from mine, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her shame. I don't want to lose everything, Matt. You have to stop this. Call people. Tell them." I cut her off, my tone colder than ever. "Tell them what, Madison? That you lied? That you cheated? That you destroyed everything we built because it didn't mean anything to you? Face it, you've already lost. Tell them it's not what it looks like." I laughed. Actually laughed. "You want me to clean up your mess, Madison? You're unbelievable." "I can fix this," she said, her voice rising with desperation. "I can fix this, Matt. We can fix this. Just tell me what you want. Do you want me to quit my job? Fine, I'll quit. Do you want me to cut contact with Mark? I'll do it. I'll do whatever you want. Please." I watched her as she spoke, taking in the widening cracks in her perfect facade. For the first time, Madison wasn't the one in control. She was begging. Begging. It should have felt satisfying, but instead, all I felt was emptiness. "I don't want anything from you," I said quietly, my voice void of emotion. Her eyes snapped up to mine, disbelief flashing across her face. "What? I don't want you to quit your job. I don't want you to fix this." I leaned in slightly, letting the weight of my words hit her. "And I sure as hell don't want to pretend that any of this can be salvaged." I stood up slowly, towering over her as she shrank into her chair. "We're done, Madison. I already filed the divorce papers." Her face went blank. You what?" "I filed," I repeated coldly. "I'm done being your backup plan, your loyal little golden retriever. You wanted a game, Madison? You played yourself." Her lip trembled. "Matt, please, don't do this." I turned my back to her, already heading for the stairs. "You did this to yourself. Now you can live with it." Behind me, I heard the faint, shuddering sound of her starting to cry. For a moment, I paused at the top of the stairs, but I didn't turn around. Madison's tears weren't mine to comfort anymore. She thought she could shatter me, humiliate me, reduce me to nothing. But she had forgotten one simple truth. Sometimes, the quiet ones hit the hardest. and I just delivered the knockout punch. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Madison pacing downstairs. Her voice rose and fell in frantic bursts as she spoke to someone on the phone. It wasn't hard to guess who she was talking to. I took my time getting ready, savoring the quiet as the weight that had hung over me for months finally began to lift. Madison was unraveling, and for once, I didn't feel like a man teetering on the edge. I felt steady, solid, in control. By the time I walked downstairs, Madison was sitting at the kitchen table. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. Her hair was a mess, her face pale, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She had a cup of coffee clutched tightly in her hands, staring into it like she might find some sort of solution to her problems in the foam. She didn't even look up when I entered the room. "Morning," I said casually, heading for the fridge. Her voice came out brittle, barely above a whisper. "Matt, I need to talk to you." I pulled out the carton of milk and set it on the counter. "About what?" She finally looked at me. Her expression was a twisted mix of anger and desperation. "Carrington, you did something, didn't you?" I didn't answer right away. I calmly poured milk into my coffee and stirred, savoring the silence as I took my time. "What makes you think I did something?" I asked, taking a slow sip. Her hands tightened around her mug. "He's in trouble. Real trouble. HR suspended him this morning, pending a full investigation," she said, her voice shaky. They think he's been inappropriate with employees." I didn't say anything, Matt, but someone must have. I leaned against the counter, watching her with a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Maybe he's just finally getting what he deserves." Her eyes narrowed, fury building. "You did this. You set him up." I shrugged, maintaining my calm. "I didn't set him up, Madison. I just told the truth." "That's a lie," she snapped back, her voice trembling with rage. "You knew exactly what would happen. You knew his reputation would explode." "And why is that my problem?" I asked, my tone cold as ice. "He kissed a married woman at a work event, Madison. He's been sleeping with someone who works directly for him. I didn't make him do any of that. I just exposed it." Her face contorted with anger. For a moment, I thought she might throw her coffee mug at me. Instead, she slammed it down on the table, spilling coffee everywhere. "You've ruined everything," she hissed. "Do you have any idea how hard I worked for that job? For that reputation? You think you're the good guy here, Matt? You're not. You're pathetic." I didn't flinch. I just stared at her, unbothered and unshaken. "No, Madison. What's pathetic is a woman who cheats on her husband and then blames him when her lies finally come crashing down." Her jaw snapped shut, her face turning a deep shade of red. She stood up abruptly, shaking with anger, but I wasn't scared. Madison's fury no longer held any power over me. She stormed out of the kitchen, grabbing her keys from the counter as she went. The door slammed behind her with such force that the walls seemed to tremble. I stood there for a long moment, the silence that followed ringing in my ears like the sweet sound of victory. That afternoon, I got a call from Ryan. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "Carrington just got fired." I blinked, though I wasn't at all surprised. "That was fast." "HR didn't waste any time," Ryan replied. "Turns out they dug into his emails, his expense reports, everything. Apparently, he's been using company money to wine and dine other women for years. Your photos were just the cherry on top." I almost laughed. Carrington, the smug, arrogant snake who had played a role in ruining my marriage, had just watched his entire world collapse in record time. "What about Madison?" I asked, curious. Ryan hesitated for a moment. "Well, she's in trouble too, man. She's not fired yet, but they've pulled her off all her projects. Word is, she's going to have to explain her role in all this to the board." I felt nothing, no pity, no guilt. Madison had been complicit in everything Carrington had done. If she thought she could get away with playing dirty, she had another thing coming. Ryan spoke again, his voice quieter now. "What's next for you, Matt? You holding up?" I exhaled slowly, staring out the window. The world outside seemed brighter, almost like I was seeing it for the first time. "I'm good, Ryan. Better than I've been in a long time." Madison came home late that night. I was sitting in the living room, the TV on but not really paying attention as I flicked through channels. When the door opened, I glanced over. She was standing there, her shoulders slumped, her face hollow and empty. She looked defeated. "Dinner's in the fridge," I said, turning my attention back to the screen. She didn't move. "Matt," she said quietly. I didn't respond immediately, but heard her close the door behind her, then lean against it as though she might collapse. "I lost everything today." I muted the TV and turned to face her, offering only a blank expression. "Not everything. You still have Carrington." Her face twisted, and for the first time, I saw tears starting to well in her eyes. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't. He's gone, Matt. He cut me off. He won't even take my calls." I didn't reply. I just stood there, letting the silence stretch between us, heavy and thick. Madison took a shaky breath, her voice cracking. "I know you hate me. I know I screwed up. But please, I need you. I need us to fix this." The audacity of it stunned me, as if there was still an us. "You need me?" I asked softly, my words laced with disbelief. "That's funny. Last week you didn't need me at all. I was just your loyal golden retriever. Remember? Stupid. Obedient. Always there." She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand, stopping her. "No, Madison. We're done. The divorce papers are filed. You'll get your half of the house, half of our savings, whatever the lawyers decide is fair. But me?" I shook my head slowly. "You don't get me anymore." Tears finally spilled down her face, tracing paths down her cheeks. "Matt, please. I don't have anyone else." "That's not my problem," I said, my voice cold and final. I stood up, grabbing my keys from the table and brushing past her on my way to the door. For the first time in years, I felt light, unburdened. Madison might have thought she could manipulate me, cheat on me, and walk away without consequences. But now she was the one left alone in the wreckage. As I stepped outside, the night air felt cool against my face. I stared up at the stars and smiled faintly to myself. She thought she had broken me, but she didn't realize I was already rebuilding. The next morning, the house felt different. Emptier, quieter. It was as though it was holding its breath. Madison's car was still in the driveway, but there was no sound from upstairs. Maybe she had stayed in bed, curled up in the same shame she thought I'd wear forever. I didn't care. I had other plans. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed my phone. I needed to tie up one last loose end, one final conversation. The call rang twice before a calm, familiar voice answered. Mark Carrington. There he was, the man who had turned my life upside down. I imagined him sitting in his overpriced suit, probably in his sterile office or what was left of it. "Mark," I said smoothly. "It's Matt Anderson." There was a pause, a long one, then a cautious response. "Matt, what can I do for you?" "You know what you can do, Mark," I said, leaning against the counter, my voice low and steady. "You can finally admit you're a fraud." Another pause. I could almost hear him choosing his words carefully, as though he were walking through a minefield. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do," I replied, cutting him off. "You lost your job, didn't you? Your little kingdom came crashing down because you couldn't keep your hands to yourself." His voice sharpened. "Listen to me, Anderson. If you think you're going to—" "I don't think anything," I interrupted coldly. "I know what happened, and you're nothing more than a fraud who got exposed." "You know what's sad, Mark?" I said, my voice quiet but cutting. "You weren't even special. Just a pathetic middle-aged man who thought he could take something that didn't belong to him. You didn't just humiliate me. You humiliated yourself. And now, you're just another cautionary tale." He didn't respond. He couldn't. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. I let it linger for a beat longer, then finished with, "I hope it was worth it, Mark." Before hanging up, that was all he deserved. An hour later, when I stepped out of the shower, I could hear Madison moving around upstairs. I found her in the bedroom, hastily shoving clothes into a suitcase. The noise of zippers, hangers clattering, and fabric being yanked from drawers filled the air like some chaotic symphony. "Going somewhere?" I asked, toweling off my hair. She didn't look at me, her movements frantic. "I'm leaving, at least for now." There it was, the final act. She was dressed in old jeans and a sweatshirt, clothes that didn't fit the polished image she usually wore. She looked worn, exhausted, as if the weight of the past week had finally broken her. Maybe it had. "I think that's a good idea," I said calmly. "It'll give us both space to move on." She froze mid-motion. Her hands clutching a sweater like it was the only thing holding her together. "Is that what you want? For me to leave?" I met her gaze without flinching. "What I want doesn't matter anymore. You made that decision for both of us the moment you betrayed me." Her face crumpled slightly, but she swallowed the emotion down. "I didn't want this, Matt. I never wanted it to end like this." "Maybe you should have thought about that before you kissed him," I said evenly, folding my arms. "Before you called me a cuckold worth searching for." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She staggered, her eyes growing glassy. "I didn't mean it," she whispered, her voice small. "It was stupid. I was stupid. I didn't let her off the hook." "Stupid," I repeated, my voice cold. "No, Madison. It was cruel. You mocked me. You enjoyed humiliating me. And for what? For Carrington? A man who dropped you the second his life got messy." She looked down at her shoes, silent, unable to meet my eyes. I took a slow step forward, my voice steady and unwavering. "Here's the truth, Madison. You didn't just ruin our marriage. You ruined yourself. The person I loved, the person I thought you were, doesn't exist anymore. So yeah, you should leave." Her tears finally fell, spilling down her face in silent tracks. But I didn't feel pity, not anymore. Madison zipped up her suitcase and grabbed the handle. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me, as if searching for something. Maybe a glimmer of forgiveness, maybe a reason to stay. She didn't find it. With one last shaky breath, she turned and walked out of the room. I heard the wheels of her suitcase rolling across the tile, the front door opening, and then the heavy click of it closing. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat down on the edge of the bed, letting out a slow, steady breath. For months, I had been drowning, smothered by lies, betrayal, and humiliation. Madison's words, her actions, her choices had been weights around my ankles, pulling me further into the darkness. But now, the house was empty, the air felt lighter, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was sinking anymore. I picked up my phone and sent a quick message to Ryan. "She's gone." His reply came almost instantly. "How do you feel?" I stared at the screen for a moment, thinking about everything that had happened, before typing, "Lighter." That evening, I sat on the back porch with a beer in hand, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The sky was painted in deep purples and reds, like the last flickers of a fire before it fades completely. And that's exactly what this was, a fire that had burned too hot for too long. Madison's betrayal had scorched everything around it, leaving only charred remains. But that was okay. Fires didn't just destroy, they cleared the way for something new. As the last slivers of light faded, I thought about the man I used to be, the one Madison had mocked, the golden retriever who trusted too easily, gave too much and expected so little in return. That man was gone now. In his place was someone stronger, sharper, someone who knew his worth. Madison had thought she could break me. She believed she could turn me into a hollow shell of a man who would beg for her to stay. But I hadn't broken. I had rebuilt. The following week blurred by in a haze of logistics. Lawyers, emails, agreements, details that filled the void she had left behind. Madison's absence made the house feel unfamiliar, like I was living in the remnants of someone else's life. But the silence? That was something I welcomed. She was gone, at least for now. I knew she'd fight the divorce with everything she had, but that was a problem for another day. One evening, I sat in my office, the desk cluttered with paperwork, staring at the half-empty glass of bourbon in my hand. It was late, and the shadows outside swallowed everything except the faint glow of streetlights. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. Unknown number. I frowned and answered. Hello. There was a long pause, followed by the sound of breathing. Then a familiar, oily voice. Matt. It was Carrington. I didn't answer immediately. I let his name hang in the air, the silence between us stretching until it became uncomfortable. What do you want, Mark? I finally asked, my voice calm and even. I think we need to talk, he replied, attempting to keep his tone steady, though I could hear the strain in it. Man to man. I nearly laughed. Man to man? That's rich coming from you. I'm serious, he said tightly. Look, you've made your point. You won. Fine. But you're not thinking about the consequences, Matt. Madison's career? Mine? This doesn't just hurt us. It's gonna blow back on you too. You think anyone's going to see you as a hero for this? You think I care about what people think? I shot back. Mark, you cheated with my wife. You didn't just cross a line, you obliterated it. And now you're crawling to me because you're scared. It wasn't personal, Carrington said after a beat, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Not personal? I repeated, my voice rising. You kissed my wife, took her to hotels, treated me like a goddamn joke. And you want me to believe it wasn't personal? Get off my phone, Mark, I said flatly. I hung up before he could respond, but my hands were shaking. Not with fear, but with pure electric adrenaline. The audacity of the man. He wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling to save himself. For the first time since this all began, I let myself laugh. Carrington, the so-called untouchable executive, was scrambling. Madison was probably doing the same thing, clinging to whatever scraps of her old life she could still hold on to. And me? I was standing tall while they both fell apart. That night, I dug deeper into Carrington's downfall. A few calls to Ryan confirmed that the investigation into Carrington's conduct wasn't slowing down. Apparently, Madison wasn't the first woman he'd lured into his hotel suites. HR had found enough dirt on him to bury his career for good. You might have done the company a favor, Ryan said over the phone. A guy like him doesn't change. Yeah, I replied. Shame it took this long. Speaking of Madison, Ryan hesitated. She's still showing up to the office, but people aren't talking to her much. Word's gotten around, Matt. She's isolated herself. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something. Was it guilt? No, it wasn't guilt. It was recognition. Madison had gambled everything, her career, her reputation, because she thought she could have it all. Carrington had been her golden ticket to something bigger, but she hadn't realized she was just another pawn in his game. And now she was alone. I expected Madison to stay gone for good. But on Thursday evening, she came back. Not to stay, no, I knew that was over. She came back to confront me. I was in the garage sorting through tools I rarely used when the door opened. There she was. She looked like hell, pale, worn out, dark circles under her eyes. Her usual confidence had completely disappeared. Matt, she said softly. I didn't look up. You shouldn't be here. I just need to talk to you. You've said enough. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. Just give me 5 minutes. I set the wrench down slowly, then turned to face her. Fine. 5 minutes. She swallowed hard, as if trying to compose herself. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I know you hate me, and I know I deserve it, but I'm lost. Matt, I don't know how to fix this. I studied her carefully, taking in the woman who once seemed so sure of herself, now reduced to this fragile version. You can't fix this, I said evenly. And you don't get to say you're sorry now. You had chances, so many chances, to tell me the truth. Instead, you let it all blow up in your face. I didn't think you'd ever find out, she admitted weakly, her gaze fixed on the ground. And that's the problem, isn't it? I said, my voice cold. You didn't think I was smart enough to see through you. You didn't think I was strong enough to do something about it. But now you're here because you finally realized I'm not the fool you thought I was. She flinched at my words, her eyes welling up with tears. It wasn't all a lie, Matt. I loved you. I still love you. I laughed bitterly. You don't love me, Madison. You love the idea of me. You love the safety, the comfort. But the second you had a chance to chase something shinier, you didn't hesitate. That's not love. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her jacket, her voice breaking once more. I don't know who I am without you. For a moment, I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness. Just clarity. That's not my problem anymore. Matt, please, she pleaded. I'm done, Madison, I said firmly, cutting her off. You need to leave. There's nothing here for you anymore. Her lips trembled, but she nodded slowly, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Goodbye, Matt, she whispered, her voice hollow. She turned and walked out of the garage, the door closing behind her with a quiet finality. I watched her go, a strange sense of peace settling over me. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about triumph. It was simply closure. Madison's chapter in my life was over. That night, I sat on the porch again, staring up at the stars, feeling the weight of the last few months lift from my shoulders. The house behind me felt different now, lighter. For so long, I had clung to something that wasn't real, trying to salvage a marriage that had rotted away long before I ever saw it. But I'd made it through, and in doing so, I'd learned something Madison never would. When you hit rock bottom, you don't stay there, you rebuild. In an odd way, I was grateful. Her betrayal had broken me open, but instead of falling apart, I discovered something stronger inside myself. For the first time in ages, I knew exactly who I was. And Madison? She would soon be nothing but a memory. Another scar that I'd wear proudly as proof I had survived. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I was ready for it. The final day I thought of Madison arrived unexpectedly, like the first breeze of spring after a long, brutal winter. There was no drama, no phone calls, no shouting, no sobbing goodbyes. Instead, it was a quiet morning, the kind where you wake up to sunlight spilling across your sheets and realize that the weight you've been carrying on your chest is simply gone. I rolled out of bed and stretched, feeling my muscles loosen, my body lighter. The house was silent, but it was the kind of silence that was peaceful, earned. I wandered into the kitchen and brewed my coffee, letting the rich aroma fill the space that Madison's absence had left behind. Somewhere during the past few weeks, I had reclaimed this house, reclaimed myself. The divorce had gone smoother than I expected. Madison hadn't fought it, not really. Maybe she was too exhausted, or maybe she'd realized there was nothing left to salvage. We divided our assets cleanly. The lawyers exchanged a few sharp words on our behalf, and that was that. She moved into a small apartment downtown, and Carrington's name quietly vanished from any conversation around town, scrubbed clean like a stain removed. I'd heard rumors. How Madison was keeping to herself, how Carrington had resigned and moved to another city to escape the scandal. But none of it mattered to me anymore. Their lives were no longer my concern. For the first time in years, I had no one to answer to but myself. That morning, as I sat on the back porch with my coffee in hand, I let my thoughts drift. The sun warmed my face, and the air smelled of fresh grass and spring flowers. For once, I wasn't replaying the past. I wasn't thinking about the party, the kiss, or those cruel words Madison had said. You're the cuckold worth searching for. I smiled faintly at the memory. Not because it didn't hurt, because it still did, but because I had survived it. I had taken the humiliation, the anger, and the betrayal, and turned them into something else. I wasn't the man Madison thought she could break. I wasn't the golden retriever who stayed loyal no matter how deeply she sank the knife. I had let her go. Ryan showed up later that afternoon, uninvited but always welcome. He had a habit of knocking once before letting himself in, claiming that I never locked the door. Today was no different. You know, one of these days you're gonna get robbed, he joked, flopping down on my couch. I shrugged. Let them try. They'll leave disappointed. He grinned and tossed me a beer, cracking open one for himself. So how's it feel? You're officially free. Divorce finalized. House to yourself. No more Madison. I took a sip and thought about it. It feels good. like starting over. Ryan raised his beer in a silent toast. Here's to new beginnings, then. To new beginnings, I echoed, clinking my bottle against his. We sat there for a while, the TV playing some forgettable game in the background while the late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows. For once, I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel hollow. I just felt alive. Later that evening, after Ryan left, I grabbed a box labeled Old Stuff from the garage and carried it into the living room. It was filled with remnants of my life with Madison. Photos, trinkets, little tokens that once had meaning. I hadn't touched it since the day she walked out, but now it felt like the right time. One by one, I sorted through the memories. There was a photo of us at the beach, her smiling, me grinning like a fool. I stared at it for a moment before tossing it into the trash bag at my feet. Gone. The anniversary cards with forever written in cursive? Trash. The trinket she bought me on our first vacation together? Trash. I didn't stop until the box was empty, until the weight of our shared history had been packed up and carried to the curb, ready for tomorrow's garbage collection. When I was done, I sat back on the couch, staring at the clean space where the box had been. It was like ripping out a thorn that had been buried too deep. Painful but necessary. A few days later, I found myself at a small coffee shop downtown. It wasn't anything fancy, just one of those places with mismatched chairs, chalkboard menus, and the smell of fresh pastries in the air. I had my laptop open, working on a new project for work, when someone caught my eye. She was sitting by the window, a book in her hand, a faint smile playing on her lips. Her dark hair cascaded in loose waves over her shoulders, and she looked so genuinely content that it was impossible not to notice. I didn't approach her, didn't say a word, but I smiled to myself as I watched her for a moment before turning back to my work, because that's what this was now, a new chapter. A life where I wasn't weighed down by betrayal or bitterness, where I wasn't someone's backup plan or second choice. A life where I could just be me. That night, as I sat on my porch again, a cool breeze rolling through, I let the quiet settle deep into my bones. Madison was gone. Carrington was nothing but a memory. The anger and humiliation they'd caused me had burned away, leaving only lessons in their place. I wasn't the man I had been before all of this. That man was gone. But I liked who I was now. Someone stronger, sharper, unshakable. As I looked out at the darkening sky, I smiled to myself. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is exactly what you need to set yourself free. And I was free, finally free.